Hi everyone, and welcome to lesson number 9 on persuasive writing with our climate change as our central focus. I'm going to now promptly disappear off your screen so that you can actually see the slide behind me here. So your title today, on the left hand side over here, we have persuasive methods. This is your title for today's work, and your objective up at the top here to craft persuasive language using the methods of fire actions. So we have already covered what these methods are, and you're probably now quite familiar with them. But today's lesson is going to be a really good opportunity for you to get creative with this, and you're going to be creating your own examples of writing using some of these methods. So in our previous lessons, we looked at how we could identify these from examples of really convincing persuasive speech making by Greta Thunberg, and we've also thought about the purpose and effect of using these to create a persuasive effect for our audience. This is not a definitive list of persuasive methods. As you will know from our early lessons, that logos, ethos and pathos are equally important persuasive methods that you should be trying to use when you create a speech or a piece of writing aimed to try and convince others to take action. So, not a definitive list, fire actions, but it's a really useful tool to train you on identifying those methods and experimenting with creating your own. So we know that this is something that you will practice as you get closer to GCSE. It will be important that you can write persuasively. And whilst a writer does not sit there with a list of fire actions and diligently write out examples for each and then try and make it stick together as a whole as a piece of persuasive writing, that would be ludicrous. They write from a place of instinct and it coming more naturally to them, but that happens through practice. So the purpose of today's lesson is to give you that practice so that you start getting comfortable with creating examples of persuasive writing that use a variety of methods so that you can then become a more natural persuasive writer later. Okay, so that's the purpose of what we're doing. And today's starter, down on the right over here, number 1, can you name all of these persuasive techniques without looking at your notes? So in lesson 6, we made notes on what these are. I want you to not cheat. Don't go back and look at your notes. Try and come up for yourself with what you think these images and the first letters are giving us a hint about in terms of the name of that method or technique. Then for number 2 on your starter, I want you to add another technique beginning with the letter R that is not on the list that you write down for starter number 1. So there is another persuasive technique that begins with an R that is not the one captured here. What is it? What could it be? Okay, so pause the video now and see if you can complete all of those by writing them down in your book. If you're visual, you may draw a little picture to accompany each one to prompt your memory as well. Okay, if not, stick to just writing the words out, and you've got the first letters here to prompt your memory. If you're really stuck, please don't worry. I'm going to give you the answers and you just need to fill it in green if you didn't know it already. There's never any shame in not knowing things. English is not about information retrieval, it's about what you think about that and what you can do to demonstrate that you understand what persuasion is. So please don't be disheartened if you didn't get every technique listed correct. That really doesn't matter. It's a part of a process of learning these skills. Okay, so have a go at answering it now, pause the video, and then we will go through the answers imminently. Okay, so I'm hoping you've now had a go at completing the task, listing the names of the persuasive techniques without looking back at your notes, and thinking of another technique beginning with R that is also persuasive. You will now need a green pen ready to go through the answers. Grab that now. And here are your answers. So answers run according to fire actions from the top down. So facts, imagery, rhetorical questions, exaggeration, we also refer to that as hyperbole. For imagery, that's also a catch-all word for techniques like metaphor, simile, personification, anything that is building imagery for the audience or for the reader. Okay, you've got your emotive language, use of strong emotional words, alliteration like she sells seashells on the seashore, that your repetition of first letters, and address. Now, with address, there are different forms of address that come into that category. Just like with imagery, there are other words that are techniques that fall within that category, like simile, metaphor, and personification. For address, there are minor forms of address within this, like direct address using you, or inclusives using we or our. Okay, both of those are also forms of what we collectively call address. Your connectives are the words that make your logic of your argument flow and develop. So words like however or furthermore. And the reason that I use the chain or the links here as a symbol for that is because they link parts of your arguments together and they make it kind of flow into a cohesive logical argument in total. So those are your words like however and furthermore. And you've got your triples, your repetition times 3. Imperatives are your command words, so the symbol there is to make you think about a judge giving an order, and an order is a form of imperative because it is a command. So any command words like sit down, do your homework, hopefully you're doing those things because you're on this video, so that's very good. Those are command words. Got opinion, new way forward, that's where you offer a solution, so we can easily overcome this by. And finally, sarcasm. Okay, and we looked at that last lesson when we looked at the way that Greta Thunberg made a comment about the lack of maturity, about world leaders not taking seriously the threat of climate change. Okay, so those are your techniques. Mark your answers, tick the ones you got correct. Any that you didn't get quite right, don't worry about it. You're learning. This will be a process that will take you many years to get very instinctively good at, and that's absolutely fine. But this is a process of learning, so fill in any ones that you got incorrect in green pen now. Okay, so hopefully you did relatively well at that. So I also asked you to name another technique beginning with an R that is not the rhetorical question up there. So you probably had as your answer repetition, which would be a very good answer for that. If you had something different, please share with me what you put down. I'd be very interested to hear. So obviously, we are going through a list of some of the persuasive methods. Now, there are lots and lots of different ways that a writer can be persuasive, and it isn't about systematically checking that they're including fire actions or whatever other acronym they might have been taught, okay? That isn't how writers operate. We teach that to you so that you have a framework that you can reference back to in order to demonstrate that you can use a real range of techniques. But that list of techniques it goes on and on. There are many other techniques a writer can also use to add emotional and persuasive effects, and that can sometimes be sentence structure types. That can also be about this order of their logic, of their argument. Do they move from logos to ethos to pathos, for example? Okay, so I want you to keep an open mind about how writers are persuasive. But today's lesson now, we're going to experiment with creating some of your own examples for these fire action techniques to get you practicing which ones work well for you, which do you think create the most persuasive effect for your writing. Okay. Right, so we are going to be note-taking for today, and you're going to need some pages of your exercise book or spare paper if you are not using your exercise book for this. And roughly, if you're working on A4, you want to divide your page into 4, and you can do that in whichever way seems to make sense for you, because each of those sections, each of the 4 sections, will be a different technique that you are going to note-take on. So it will become clearer when you look at the first slide, but you essentially want to roughly divide your page up into 4, and there are going to be 14 techniques in total that we are working through. If you are working in one of the tiny exercise books, I know some of you were at the end of last term when we all began lockdown, then you are going to be roughly dividing a page into 2 because it's a much smaller space that you've got to write on in your exercise book. And so you're aiming to calculate for 14 techniques in total, with 4 a page on A4 or 2 a page if you're working out of a small exercise book. Okay, and we're going to get going. Right, so what I want you to do is to copy down your first name of a technique into your first quarter of your page, if you're working on A4, and that is facts. What you need to write down next to that is the purpose and effect that I've included here. So using evidence to illustrate a point or to make something clear, for example. Okay, now your next step, once you've copied that down, is going to be to create either a random example, if you like, of a fact, or for more challenge and for more use when it comes to your assessment, have a go at this challenge to create a climate change example. So using facts to make an argument about climate change. You can go and pause the video now, look up some facts on the internet that you can use to help you with this, search them up. Or you can go and check out one of our earlier lessons where I played you a video which outlined some of the basic facts about climate change and the impact that it's having on the planet. So either of those options for you, but you'll need to pause the video, copy down the purpose and effect, and then either create a random example of a fact to use to persuade, or for the challenge, give a climate change example, so you need to go and find your fact to help you with that. Okay, pause the video there, guys. Okay, if you are still completing the last task, please pause the video. Do not start this until you are ready. Our next technique for the second of your quarters of your page is going to be for the subtitle of imperatives, and those are your command words, so orders, like this down here: you must join up and fight now. So that is a command: you must join up and fight now. So we know he is using imperatives. And the purpose and effect, it's talking directly to the audience and making sure they know that they're involved, but it's also forcing them to take action. Okay, so you can add depth to your purpose and effect analysis there. And then you're going to come up with either a random example of using an order or a command, an imperative, to make an argument, or you can complete the challenge, which will help you when it comes time for your assessment, and create a climate change example of using an imperative. So Greta Thunberg used that in her piece that we looked at last lesson, and you may want to look back at the printout version of that speech, which is in the description to lesson number 8, and find some examples there for inspiration. You want to give a command or an order about climate change. Okay, pause the video there, complete the task, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so next technique on our list for number 3 of your first page is rhetorical questions, purpose and effect. Questions that don't require an answer. So the effect of that is that it forces the reader to have to think, or the audience to have to think and engage with whatever question the speaker is putting across to them. Do you really want this for your future? They're forcing you to think about the issue and take responsibility for that. So you need to write down what you think the purpose or effect of it is for a rhetorical question. Then see if you can come up with an example of a question that could be used to make an audience think. And finally, for a challenge, give a climate change example if you can. So think of a rhetorical question, a question that you don't really expect an answer to, that is about climate change, that you could pose to your audience in order to force them to really think about the issue. Do you want this for your planet? Something like that. See if you can outdo me, find a better example than that, and then pause the video there. Okay, so the next example that you will need to write down as your 4th is repetition. Again, what do you think the purpose or effect is? Repeating yourself to make something clear could be a good answer to that, or to show that it's important. Okay, so you can summarise an answer like I have offered you here, but see if you can add some more detail than that. Then give an example of how it could be used. So really famous examples are things like I have a dream, and for the challenge then, can you come up with your own example for a climate change persuasive speech? What would you say using repetition to try and force people to take action or care about what's happening with climate change? And pause the video. Okay, so the next technique I'm going to give you here is actually a new one for you. So this is a form of repetition and we call it an Affray, okay? And the purpose of this is to repeat a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. So as you can see in the example here from Charles Dickens, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light. It was a season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. And as you can see there, we're getting the repetition of it was, it was, it was at the end of each clause. Okay, so think about the effect of that building towards this sort of sense of motion in the writing. It feels like it's moving towards something, building up to a conclusion. Okay, so ironically that's actually from the opening of his novel. So your example now, I want you to see if you can think of your own phrase that you could use to repeat at the beginning of successive, that means following on from one from the other, phrases, using a repeated little phrase at the beginning of sentences, one after another or after a comma. Okay, and then for the challenge, see if you can create an example of that. Do it at least 3 times of repetition, 4 if you can, to build on the sense of climate change. Okay, so this is a tough technique, guys, but give it a go. Have a look again at this model one from Charles Dickens to give you some inspiration. So next one coming at you is emotive language, and for this one, think about the use of really strongly emotional words and how those can be used to persuade. What do we think the purpose and effect is? Well, you can use some of the information here to answer that, using powerful strong words to try and persuade people to think a certain way, e.g. player was in some pain, doesn't really kind of dramatise the emotion for the audience to really understand what they're trying to say, whereas the player was in great agony. That use of an emotive word like agony allows us to really feel the full extent to which the player is affected by the emotion. Okay, so give yourself now an example of emotive language. I'm sure you can come up with a more creative one than the football themed one I've used there. And for your challenge, can you say what climate change example you could create using emotive language? So we know from Greta Thunberg's example that she used the example of talking personally about how sad and angry it made her feel. Can you create your own example using emotive language? See if you can outdo Greta and use words that are more emotive than sad or angry. Can you go more extreme with it without it becoming ridiculous? Okay, so have a go at completing this task and I'll see you for the next technique. So your next technique to write down is exaggeration, which is otherwise known as hyperbole. And the purpose and effect, as you can see illustrated by our picture here, is to exaggerate, as it says, and make something seem bigger or more important or more urgent than it really is. I want you to see if you can create your own example, and then your example for climate change. So an example of you exaggerating or using over-exaggeration in your word choice to try and dramatise the situation with climate change. Again, remember there's a really fine line here between using it effectively and overdoing it. If you're too drastic with your exaggeration, it'll lose some of the impact and effect. So you don't want it to come across as being sarcastic at this point. You just want to use it to try and get a reaction out of your audience, but it shouldn't be too over the top. Okay, it's really hard, but give it a go, see what you can come up with. And our next technique, alliteration, and this is your repetition of the sounds, and one of the purposes or effects of this, as it says here, is to repeat the sounds in a sentence. Now what that does is it ties words together. Okay, so we've looked previously at Greta Thunberg's use of it in her conclusions to her speeches. So the world is waking, for example, waking up to the issue. Climate change change is coming. Using that sort of repetition of letters ties words together, and that builds more emphasis, and it enables her to communicate her message really directly to her audience, to make them pay attention to those central words. So alliteration often used to emphasize specific words to tie them together, to make it seem like there is more power to those words than they would otherwise have. Okay, see if you can now create an example of alliteration like the she sells seashells on the seashore. Then, for your challenge, a climate change example. How could we use it? You're probably going to be working with the letter C if you're going to be doing it on climate change, although you might want to work with a W and work with the word world, or P for planet. Okay, so take one of those letters, see if you can create a sentence that strings together that repetition of that central letter to really emphasize those words and make it seem powerful. Okay, although this sounds like a sophisticated technique to use your connectives, it is actually one of the easiest techniques, and the easiest wins in a piece of persuasive writing is to use these to add a sense of like intellectual ability to make a really convincing speech sound good. So this is a great technique to be able to use in your writing, and that's your use of these connectives. And connectives are the words and phrases we use to string sentences together and connect ideas, like furthermore, in addition. Okay, and I want you now to see if you can list some other examples of connectives. So we've got furthermore, we've got in addition. What other words could we use? Pause the video, do that first, and then we'll think about your climate change example. Okay, so hopefully you've written down some of your examples of connectives, like furthermore or in addition. You could have had words like moreover, on the other hand, similarly, therefore. These are all excellent connectives that you can use to develop your sense of your argument formation. Okay, so add some of those to your example list. Then, for the challenge, I want you to create a sentence about climate change, but you've got to begin it with a powerful connective. So a word like moreover, unless we act now, climate change is going to destroy the world as we know it. Okay, so something like that. Come on, guys, outdo me, please. I'm sure you can create much better work than I'm giving you as it comes to my head in these videos. Prove what you can do. Send me some examples of your work afterwards. Okay, your next technique, triples, or repetition times 3, and this is used often because it really overemphasizes an idea. I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. It's going to really hammer a point home to an audience. So it's quite a powerful technique to use. You have to again be careful not to overuse repetition without it sounding too formulaic and boring. And I've dropped a link to a video from Friends in the Persuasive Writing playlist on my channel. Please go check it out, from the series Friends, where you can see Joey overusing triples and repetition, and it has an awkward effect. So go check that video out and watch how we can get these techniques wrong if we're not careful. Having said that, can you now create an example for yourself of what you think an example of using triples might look like, and then have a go at your challenge? Can you describe climate change using a triple? You might want to play with an emotive word for that triple, like the word devastating, for example, or something similar. So see if you can write a sentence using 3 times repetition of a powerful word. Okay, so now we're getting to some really meaty, interesting techniques that writers can use. This is one of my favourites. This is invent an enemy. I'm not really sure what this says about my personality. Please do not tell me what you think this means about me. But invent an enemy, a really effective persuasive technique, because what it allows you to do is to create a common figure to blame. It usually goes hand in hand with diminishing responsibility yourself. So by blaming the opposite side of the argument, making making them look bad, you then elevate your side of the argument to make it look as if you must be right or in the moral high ground. So one of the ways that Greta Thunberg did this in her piece that we looked at last lesson was that she effectively blamed and demonised all of those world leaders who were not taking action on climate change. In fact, she says you're happy to have meetings for Brexit, but you're not doing this for climate change. She's using a tactic of making the other side of the argument, those that don't take action for climate change, look bad, so that her side of the argument looks morally superior and better. So, for example, one of the other things that she does in her speech that we looked at last lesson was that she talked about the fact that, you know, people care about making money and they care about, these world leaders are bothered about that, and fairy tales of economic success, she calls it. And yet they don't seem to be choosing to do what's right, and they're failing the people. And she says that she doesn't want to believe that they are deliberately failing the people by not making climate change a bigger concern, because that would mean that they were evil if that's what they were deliberately doing. And by saying that, she makes it almost impossible for them to take on her argument and prove her wrong without looking as if they are evil because they're not taking her point seriously. It's a really clever technique to win an argument. It's to make it impossible for the other person to argue back, because you say, if you say that, then that would clearly mean that you are arguing that this is the way forward, but that would lead to destruction. And by saying that, you make it impossible for them to argue with you, because you're making them look like they are morally wrong if they don't agree with your side of the argument. Very clever technique there. So, for example, if you wanted to think of an example here that is non-climate change related, you might think if someone was writing a speech or an article about veganism, that you might demonise the other side, like those of us who eat meat, by saying that, you know, are you really happy to continue to cause the suffering of other creatures? I'd like to think that you wouldn't possibly be arguing that, because that would seem to be utterly immoral. And then it's really hard for the other side to then attack your argument, because you've made it very clear that it would be immoral to attack your argument, okay? Now, this is really hard, so I'm not necessarily expecting you to get this and be able to do it, but if you can, I'd be really impressed. Please share your work if you manage this. I'd love to read what you're coming up with. So for your challenge, climate change example then of inventing an enemy, how could you make it really hard for those who are climate change deniers, people that don't believe in the impact of climate change or don't think it's important, to argue back? How would you make it sound really bad if they argue back with you? What could you say to them that would make it seem like their viewpoint is really immoral? Okay, this is tough stuff. I'm going to be so impressed if you manage this well. Okay, so have a go at doing that now. Right, if the last one was way too hard, please don't worry about it. You just move on and you try the next technique and see how you get on with that. So our next technique is opinion. And we're going to think about purpose and effect now. So when you give your opinion, you are sharing your ideas or thoughts on a chosen subject, perhaps quite obviously. And the reason that you do that is perhaps to draw on the respect that people have for you or for your opinion on things, in order to influence them to maybe share that viewpoint themselves. So see if you can come up with an example now of an opinion, and then for the challenge, a climate change example of an opinion. In my opinion, you may begin it if you wish. You don't have to though. Okay, this one is not as tough as the invent an enemy one, but it is a really sophisticated technique again. Is to be able to offer a new way forward. So it's like offering a solution to the problem. So a new way forward is proposing a solution, and you could think of any example, say like a new way forward on the topic of the veganism thing would be quite easy and simply, more people need to eat less meat. We can do this by having days in the week where we choose not to have meat with our meal. That's a step towards progress. You're offering a new way forward. You're offering a sort of solution to a problem. Now, your job come up with a climate change example of a new way forward. What solutions could you offer that would make things better for society and for climate change and its impact? Okay, have a go at doing that now. Okay, and one of your final ones now on sarcasm. So this is one that I have caveated in previous lessons where I've said you've got to be really, really careful with sarcasm. It can be fantastically effective, but you have to tread that fine line between not offending people too extremely and making the point, and that's a really fine line to tread. Okay, it's hard to do effectively, but it's worth us experimenting with it and having a go and seeing whether we can do that well ourselves. So sarcasm, as you can see in the image here, the ability to insult idiots without them realising it. Harsh maybe. I think Greta would probably agree with that though. And sarcasm then, if you think of some examples of that, can you think of any famous examples of sarcasm? We've got the figure in here is Chandler from Friends, who, if you have a look at the video clip that I've put into the Persuasive Writing playlist on my channel, you can watch him in that and you can see some of his sarcasm at work. So come up with an example. Then, for your challenge, can you make a sarcastic comment about climate change? Like Greta did, you may wish to take on world leaders or governments as the subject of your sarcasm. And you might want to, as she does, make a point about their levels of maturity or their education or something as a way of making your argument work. Don't be too vicious with it or you will come off seeming petty, okay? So a little bit of sarcasm, but don't take it too far. See what you can do with that. Okay, so at this point I'm going to ask you to go and check out the playlist where I've put the video here from Friends, and I want you to have a look at how Joey uses language. And Joey's written a speech for his friend's wedding. It uses a lot of particular techniques over and over and over, and I want you to think, why does it not work? What is wrong with what he is doing and how could he have improved it? Okay, so instead of doing our peer assessment feedback in class today, you're going to do it based on Joey and Friends, because why not? Okay, so give that a go, then meet me back here for the end of the video. So pause this one, then load up YouTube, go and have a look at the playlist, watch the one on Friends, and then pick back up with the lesson again. Right, so before we end today's lesson, you are going to be paragraph writing, and you are going to be aiming to write using at least 4 of the techniques that we have been practicing in today's lesson. So you can choose any 4 that you like. Really impressive techniques if you need a challenge are to use your invent an enemy, your new way forward, and your anaphora as well, that repetition at the beginning of repeated sentences or phrases or parts of sentences. Okay, so those ones would be a good 3 to try and include, and then 1 other of your choice. Alright, so your job, choose 4 techniques from fire actions, all the ones that we've scaffolded in today's lesson, and you need to try and write up a full paragraph about climate change and why we need to take action on it. And you need to try and include all 4 of those techniques, making them flow together to develop a convincing argument. Try to do it with flair, not like the Joey clip I sent you to go and have a look at, okay? And pause the video. You need to spend 5 to 10 minutes working on this minimum. Okay, and then I'm going to go over some self-assessment criteria for you to mark it in green pen. Okay, so you should have had a go at writing up your paragraph using 4 different techniques to develop a really strong persuasive effect on the topic of climate change. So you've scaffolded that throughout the lesson, then you've put it to use in your own writing, which is awesome because you're developing those skills and being able to really convince others to do what you want and to think how you want them to think. Useful, hey? And your task now is going to be to self-assess what you've produced. So as you can see in my table here, I've got my what went wells in the column on the left, and I've got my even better ifs on the column on the right, and I want you to try and choose at least 2 from both columns that you think apply to you. So have a go at doing that now, pause the video and write in your feedback in green pen. Right, well done everyone, and thank you again for sitting through the video and for completing all of the tasks. Please share your work with me. You can drop me an email or you can send it via Share My Homework. If you're not in my class, then that's absolutely fine, and welcome and thank you for being here. Can you send your examples of what you've written to your class teacher, and they can always forward it on to me. I'm really so grateful that I get to create this content for you, and I really hope that some of it is helping you with your writing. I'd really love to hear from you because I'm missing you all massively, as I'm sure you can imagine. All right, now stay safe everyone, be good.